has the power to define. And poetry is that this thing got to do with evoking. Like, enough of that mini lecture. If I got any questions? Yeah, not what we call legitimate poetry. I was making up toasts like shine, those kind of. I defined myself as a poet. As I was telling David, I was a poet and I didn't know it. But no, I defined myself as a poet until I was in prison and I started wanting to expand my audience. I already had an audience in the joint, and the only way to expand it was through the printed page. And that's all the printed word is, an extension of the spoken word. Anybody want to argue with that? Any English professor that want to argue with that? That's all it is. The printed word is an extension of the spoken word. This is how it came into existence. At some point, when you couldn't say what you wanted to say to somebody, they got too far away, you had to make up a sign, a symbol that represented a tone of your voice. They're not separate entities at all. Somebody want to argue with that? I mean, I thought.
I want to ask about it. Do you find that you can change around the printed word more effectively, and you pull it out after a year or two and play with it more easily than you can in the spoken
word? Yeah, that's what we were talking about this afternoon. That's a revision. First, you have to have a vision, and then a revision. Sure, because language is a living thing. Language comes about by the world, by the economy, by politics, by the shape of the environment you live in. People in mountains talk in different speech patterns than people who live in valleys. People who live on islands, speech patterns are different than people who live in wide open spaces. I mean, language is it's the basic vehicle of communication. I mean, there's body language and blah, 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 but the word, the spoken word is the major way we communicate, that we come into communion, our community. And it's why we don't speak English, we speak American. We don't speak the same language that 18 million people on an island off the coast of France speak. Our language has been informed by Indians, Spanish, Africans, been informed by our history and the patterns. The English speak generally, their general speech pattern is iambic pentameter. I say, "Oh, chap, will you stop in for a spot of tea?" I mean, like they have those voice graphs like fingerprints, that you can tell a person talking just like you tell by his fingerprints. And and punctuations, for instance, what we know as punctuations in grammar that came from ye olde England, they don't fit American language we speak. I mean, what you got? You got a period, comma, colon, semicolon, a dash. What else? And all of these are meant to, they prove itself. A period means a pause. It's got to do with breath. It's got to do with orality. A comma means a little slighter, slowing up. The implication is as you read it aloud. Yeah, and poems are meant to be, they're made up to be read aloud. The whole language. In fact, I read somewhere, and I'm sure somebody can probably find it, that even when you're reading silently, there are little muscles moving in your throat. And as I'm, if I start off on some intellectual abstraction, still, as I'm talking to you, there is a physical thing going on. The words from my mouth are rattling bones in your ears. That is a physical communication. And that's got to do with rhythm. It's got to do with rhyme, intonation, when you're intoning, whoa, or lamenting. If I say, oh, or if I say, e, that little bones in your ears are moving differently. That's physical. Ain't got to do with intellect at all. It's got to do with the belly. And that's where the language is built on. Especially the language we speak is built on the vowels. That meant election. But you know what I'm saying? I don't know if it's true or not, but that's where you be coming from in poetry. I bet you somebody could, document it and prove it. I ain't gonna do it. I ain't got time. I'm gonna keep on making a point. But I bet you, man, that's what the language is. The language is a living thing. It ain't on the page. I mean, it ain't just the ink and marking on the page. That's why I call it the mother tongue. All right. I read this article that when a mother fathers don't do it because of our culture. The daddy got to go, 9 to 5, blah, blah, blah. But why things are called the mother tongue. The mother tongue, it's got to do with the connotative side of the word rather than the denotative side of the word. The denotative side, the authority, author, authority, the denotative side of the word, its authority depends upon history and precedent, all the shit that was going on before. It is the external authority. That's the authority of the teacher, judge, preacher, and all that. The connotative side of the word, the feminine side of the word. Its authority comes about through common agreement, through internal, not external. We agree that a certain rise of the voice, or lowering of the voice, intonations, and that the reason that it proves valid that the subject, look at the logical language. First there's the subject, the verb, and then the object. Objectivity, you can do without. You can't do without the subject and the verb. That in the goo-goo and the gaga and the and all of that is connotative even before you get to the literal meaning of words. You know, the no, all of that's connotative before you get to the objective. That's why I say, what's your mother tongue? And that's why poetry is so hard to translate from one language to the other. Yeah, that means like shit.
Rhythm's there. You don't have time to develop it the way you're talking about it. The poem has song. In other words, it's more of an abstraction in terms of image. It almost calls for visual image. You're working on a completely different idea rather than just the sound.
Yeah, what I understood about the haiku, I had problems a long time. Gwendolyn Brooks turned me on to him, because she said, I was talking to her and she wanted me to deal with images and not use a whole bunch of long words to say what I want to say. Well, in the first place, I understand that the haiku poets in ye olde Japan and China were, first place, oral poets. They'd be sitting just like we drinking wine and tea. They'd be walking around their very rigid gardens and things, and they'd be making up. They were oral in the first place, and then there are certain characteristics. I understand that somehow you got to get in there a time, a sense of the season. Then you got to get in there a sense of motion. There's always a bird flying, a cow swishing its tail, a rain falling. There's movement. You got to get in there a sense of season, which means a time and a place. They're usually pastoral, landscapish, or whatever the word is for that. If you look at poetry, it's really you can look at it one way as just simply relationships. Poet's relationship with the poet's own self, poet's relationship with other selves, poet's relationship with nature, blah. And I, the haiku poems, I think, is the relationship of the poet person with nature, like in English. In England, I think they call them pastoral poems, but there's the characteristics of time and place are usually characteristics of most good poems. There is a sense poems are grounded. They're grounded in a time and a place. And in haiku, it's obvious. I mean, there's always a sense of the season, at least. It's summer, spring, and then there's a movement, and there's something living. Always, that's the verb. There's something living. There's a cow waving its tail, a bird flying, leaves blowing in the wind, or something. And that's usually characteristic of most good poems if you approach them that way. But I've always wanted to hear from some Japanese haiku poet, because I read haiku. I don't know if I'm reading them right. You know, well, hell, I guess it's some. I just say, well, it's American haiku, but I've always wanted to hear Japanese haiku poets read haiku, just to see how they do. Anybody else? Well, y'all, anybody's got no questions? There's some wine right in the back. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I also found out that this is my justification for drinking wine. If in the Greek mythology, that wine is, there were 7 muses. Yeah.